Now, the end of Roman Britain has long been established as 409, 410 AD, and we have a number of different things we can use to evidence that. However, things keep popping up that maybe put that into question on the smaller scale. Things like Chedworth Roman Villa, or part of the mosaic there, was laid after 424 AD, and perhaps on the bigger scale we have things like Zosimus, Greek historian, who tells us Emperor Honorius was suggesting that the Britons should now fend for themselves and look after their own security. Or perhaps Zosimus wasn't actually talking about Britain after all. We also have Gildas stating that the Romans left Britain building towers along the shore and building a wall as they left, but he mentions no date or no emperor. Well, that sounds like the complete wrong era of Roman history. Okay, let's back up. Today we're going to go on a walk in this landscape. I'm going to show you a wonderfully preserved piece of Roman road. We're then going to walk northwest, come down into a place called Ashley, which is over 1,000 years old, all sorts of treasures in there. And we're going to end the walk today on what could be a Roman settlement. Join me as we discuss, did we misunderstand the end of Roman Britain? Now, you may recall a few weeks back I made a video about something called the Bockley Dyke, which was essentially a defensive wall built down in Dorset, stretching maybe 10 miles, remodelled twice in its lifetime. The second time cut across the Roman road that went and connected Sarum to Dorchester, and it was never repaired. We have this wall being used soon after 364 AD and some point after 393 AD. Now, when I made a video about all this, I came to the conclusion that this secondary construction of this wall was likely in response to Honorius's words. So that all fitted quite well for me, and it fitted in with the well-known, well-held, long-established date of 409 to 410 AD. Bockley Dyke could be the key to all of this. More on that at the end. Now, I did promise you a few treats today, so before treat number one, well, let's take 90 seconds to consider what evidence we do have for the end of Roman rule to be the long-held and established date of 409 to 410 AD. Timer, go. 1. As mentioned, we have Zosimus, a Greek historian from around 80 to 100 years on. He writes Nova Historia, and in book 6 he states Honorius sent the letters to the cities of Britain counselling them to be watchful of their own security. This was supposedly in 409 AD. 2. We have Gildas, a British monk who lived in the 6th century, referring to repeated letters from the Britons asking for help from Rome. 3. We have the Chronica Gallica of 452. This was written in Gaul and suggested that Britain was ravaged by the Saxons in 409 and 410 AD. And 4. We have archaeological evidence largely in that of coinage. We see a dramatic decline in the influx of coinage from around 402 AD, with very few gold or silver coins minted after 411 AD reaching the island. We also have urban decay, we have changes in settlement patterns, and perhaps the most convincing of all, we have hoards of coins being buried dating between 410 and 450 AD. Okay, so that's all pretty conclusive. The general accepted theory, 407 AD, the British legions elect Constantine as their emperor. They then march on into Gaul. They leave Britain undefended, and the Britons write to Rome for help. So that's it, job done. However, right, treat number one coming up just here. Actually, we have to dive into a hedge, which is never an easy task in the early summer. Look at this right ahead of us now, really intact, well preserved piece of Roman road. I'll try and put some cameras down to show you the sizable agger. It's huge, so the agger is the main part of the Roman road, probably about 4 or 5 feet high, and yeah, wonderful piece of history. 2,000 years sat right under our feet, hidden away in this hedge. Okay, if you had hedge diving on your bingo card, well, you can tick that off right now. Okay, treat number one of the day complete. Let's get back on track and we have a look at the writings of Zosimus, our first and main source for this. Well, if we flip to a translation of his writing, and we flip to book 6, and we have a look at the wording in the context of what he was writing as a whole, well, that's when we have our first issue of the day. Section 6.10, operations in northern Italy, and our key sentence is right here. Honorius, having sent letters to the cities of Britain counselling them to be watchful of their own security. Now either side of that we have discussion of a Gothic king, Alaric, and security being upheld through the support of Heraculaneus. Completely out of context. Now it could be that he wasn't referring to Britain after all, in fact he was referring to a province in southern Italy, Bruttium. Long story short, here's why. Honorius, the main emperor at the time, was in Ravenna, and his imperial rival Attalus was in possession of Rome, but grain was being withheld and he needed to access it. He needed to cross to northern Africa, limiting the amount of time at sea. Heraculaneus was governor of Africa and was blocking this grain movement. So it could actually be that he was indeed talking out Bruttium. That would make sense in 1, the context of his writing, and 2, the context of Attalus needing to travel through those cities in order to get to the coast and secure the grain he needed. Okay, so before we look at treat number 2 of the day, which is just down in the valley there, let's consider Gildas, the British monk historian, because he wrote a passage about this. I'll put the passage just here. Gildas wrote that upon leaving, well, they helped the miserable natives build a wall and some forts along the southwest coast. Presume he's talking about the wall in the north, then he's talking about the one that Severus built, Hadrian, and of course on the south coast, well, we know those forts were built as part of the 3rd century crisis, late 200s, and there is no mention of a date here or even an emperor to help us. Further to that, any appeal in these letters sent to Honorius in 409 would not have actually been sent to Honorius in the first place. Constantine was recognised as a co-emperor, however by 440 AD there was no rival emperor in the west. We now have another paragraph. The Gauls and the Spains were entirely destroyed by barbarian nations, Vandals, Suebi and the Alans. The Britons were lost to the Roman name forever. Oh, this is odd because the destruction of Spain and Gaul, that didn't happen until sort of late 430s. Perhaps Gaul even later 440s. So if we're trying to link those two events with the loss and destruction of Britain from the Roman Empire, then we need to be looking a lot later than 410 AD. In the meantime, you've just been looking at a church that's over 800 years old. Have a look at some of these curious features. Okay, so this is St Mary's Church in Ashley in Hampshire, and it dates to the mid to late 1100s, and it was built for a very specific reason. I'll tell you why in a second, but I'm looking for one particular feature in here that I want to show you. There's loads of features I could show you, but the one specific one I'm looking for is that there. That is a 750-ish year old painting. So many other really random features in this church. I'm not going to tell you about those at the moment. What we are going to tell you about is why this church was built in the first place. Come and have a look at this outside. Okay, so if you thought that church was a treat, well, why was it built? Because this is something else, and we start to see evidence of why just here, because we have a big earthwork there walking towards the back of the churchyard, and the further we come this way the more we can see, because if I just step underneath this tree and maybe point the camera that way, well, that there is a moat from 1150 and the church thereafter to support the castle that would have been on top of here. So this is the remains of a 900-year-old moat, and what an absolute treat this little site was. Onwards to the rest of today's journey. Okay, so what about the evidence of coinage? That's often one thing used to highlight that the end of Roman rule was in Britain, 409-410 AD. In the late Roman Empire, we have two fractions of the army. The first was effectively a mobile unit, and the second was considered more like the home guard or border control. So the question needs to be asked, if there's no money coming in from the imperial mint, then what's the reason? How are we paying these people and the armies to continue onwards? Well, that is an important consideration, but consider the armies left are of course the home guard type armies. The motivator for them to stick around is they're tied to that province, it's their heritage. And of course that would come at perhaps a less of a cost, so the recirculation of money that was already here in Britain could well have been the biggest factor. So how long could that have continued for? Well, the length of time in an army is around 25 years. So perhaps, of course, then we're seeing that date of 435 to 440 AD pop up once again. Okay, treat number 3 of the day coming up just across the brow of that hill there. So what exactly was going on in 410 AD that meant that the Romans suggested that Britain must now fend for itself? What were those threats? You see, we have the continual taxes coming in for the recruitment of armies. We have an eastern frontier of Persia, which is relatively stable. It meant we don't have fighting east and west. So I guess perhaps at least for the last 20 to 30 years, this is as stable a period as any. The Romans have been through these threats before. 435 to 440 AD, we have a very different landscape altogether. First of all, we have the impact of the separation of the Roman Empire into two sort of parts. Now that really sapped resources, even though it took place as early as 395 AD, well, it took decades for that to sort of creep in and take effect. However, the 430s saw a very different problem altogether. That problem came in the form of King Genseric, 428 AD. Heralded as king of the Vandals and the Alans, and within a year he gathered 80,000 men and crossed the Straits of Gibraltar from Spain and started his campaign on the Roman forces. They swept across North Africa by 439 AD. These provinces were the single biggest asset of revenue for the Roman Empire, and now we really do have a crisis. We now have a civil provincial government breaking down, an empire without any ability to send representatives to Britain. This would ultimately mean the abandonment of Britain and a requirement for them to elect their own kings and send appeal to the Roman general Flavius Aetius. And the date of that letter? Well, we don't know, but his third council was 446 AD. And you see those trees on the horizon just there? We're just the other side of those Roman settlement. Let's go take a look. Okay, I'm going to dump from my bag and show you exactly what a Roman settlement looks like. It's going to get my bearings. Okay, so we've got a field in front of me here, and there's no formal archaeology been done on this site. However, they found enough to assume that there was some gullies here, a load of pottery, a big Roman enclosure, earthworks at the back there, ditches and gullies around the back, and therefore there would have been a villa just here somewhere, and the entire complex here would have been associated with that villa. Not a lot to see, but apparently there's a whole load of Roman pottery that's been found here. Now, here's the thing. How does today's discussion help us maybe date Bockley Dyke? Well, it doesn't really, because the latest date for Bockley Dyke was 393 AD. The simple answer to all of this, both the date of Bockley Dyke and of course perhaps the real end to Roman rule in Britain, would be if we did some more current archaeology on Bockley Dyke. Imagine if we had some optical stimulated luminescence, if that's the right word, where you can take a bit of soil out of the ground and you can establish the date that soil last saw light. Well, imagine if we took a number of samples from that dike, well, we could date the dike, and maybe that would help us give much more evidence to today's topic of when exactly was the end of Roman rule in Britain. I've been Paul. Appreciate you watching. I want to do a big hat tip to this paper just here, which is the inspiration for this video. I'll put that link in the description below so you can dig a bit deeper than I have. See you this time next week.